we have seen far too often that Egypt agrees to an IMF arrangement and then it agrees to float its exchange rate. We see bouts of depreciation, and then the central bank starts to intervene again, which kind of goes back on all of the progress that was made towards attaining the flexible exchange rate regime. So it's important to view the recent depreciation of the Egyptian pound within the context of the IMF's broader goals. And this is not the first time that the IMF has actually proposed this and that the Central Bank of Egypt has attempted to shift towards a floating exchange rate regime. In actual fact, this occurred back in 2016 when Egypt signed an arrangement or an agreement with the IMF, which was valued at around $12 billion. And back in 2016, the Egyptian pound was actually devalued, or it lost a significant amount of its value against the dollar upon signature of that agreement. If we maybe just fast forward from that period of time to where we are today, what ultimately happened was the Central Bank of Egypt was intervening for many years, pumping dollars into the exchange rate market. But in order to maintain this policy, it needed a lot of foreign reserves, and which it was running out of because the Russia-Ukraine war began, and that saw a sudden outflow of portfolio inflows, and essentially Egypt ran out of US dollars, or was running particularly low on US dollars. So it could no longer maintain this policy. It was no longer sustainable to intervene anymore. It's important to emphasize that it's not the first time that floating exchange rate has been required. And it's something that we hope that the IMF will be more strict about going forward when it does sort of assess Egypt's progress, because we have seen far too often that Egypt agrees to an IMF arrangement and then it agrees to float its exchange rate. We see bouts of depreciation, and then the central bank starts to intervene again, which kind of goes back on all of the progress that was made towards attaining the flexible exchange rate regime.
We are also looking at our region, and we want it to be a role model for the region. And we are encouraging a lot of the countries around us to really do reform. And we are changing the way we provide assistance and development assistance. And we used to give direct grants and deposits without strings attached. And we are changing that. We are working with multilateral institutions to actually say we need to see reforms.
We definitely saw the GCC's financial support take a different form. So we're definitely getting the impression that the GCC countries sort of want more in return, or sort of more tangible returns for the money that they provide the Egyptians. And this sort of seems to be taking the form of investing in state-owned enterprises. And obviously there are concerns that sort of arise with that kind of strategy, because a lot of these people who are investing in or are purchasing the Egyptian state-owned enterprises could potentially be politically connected to the Egyptian government or to the Egyptian military, which then raises the question of whether these state-owned enterprises are actually being sold off to the private sector in the end, or if they're just being sold to someone who's politically connected to the current regime.
وظروفنا مش بتاعتنا احنا اللي عملناها. دي ظروف قدر الله سبحانه وتعالى شاء ان الدنيا تبقى كده ال3 سنين اللي فاتوا، ويمكن تستمر معانا شويه كمان. طب هنعمل ايه؟ احنا كدوله بنحاول بكل ما اوتينا من قدرات، والقدرات دي مش بتاعتي ومش بتاعت الحكومه، دي قدرات الدوله، ملك الدوله. ان احنا
As you mentioned, on the one hand, there's sort of the implications of the Russia-Ukraine war, which really had a devastating impact on Egypt and other net importer countries. It's also a result of the structure of the economy. So as it's largely consumption-based, and the economic policies up until this point haven't really encouraged Egypt to develop its private sector, to promote exports, to promote local production of goods and services. the country's become incredibly reliant on these external services and external products, which makes it even more vulnerable to these external shocks when they do occur, such as rising global commodity prices, which we saw. And then obviously there was also the COVID-19 pandemic, which happened as well. But then on the other hand, we've seen the country receive a large amount of portfolio inflows over the last few years since 2016. These portfolio inflows, it could be argued the money could have possibly been used differently. So as you mentioned, a large part of the debt that the Egyptians acquired went towards buildings, lavish projects and infrastructure. And it could be argued that some of these projects didn't necessarily generate the economic growth and the revenue required. So the government essentially got themselves into a lot of debt to develop these buildings and this infrastructure, but the infrastructure is actually not giving anything back to the economy, which I think is the bigger issue. So high inflation, a high cost of borrowing sort of paints a bleak picture for what's to come this year at least. But once the effects of the various bold policy moves do sort of start to filter through and the situation starts to stabilize, our view for the medium term does become a little bit more upbeat, and we see economic growth reaching around 3% over the medium term. But this is also largely dependent on the government's commitment to its state privatization program, its ability to attract foreign direct investment inflows, and then also its commitment to maintaining the floating exchange rate regime. Because at the moment, there's a lot of uncertainty around whether the Central Bank of Egypt will simply go back to intervening in the currency market or not. And this uncertainty creates sort of puts foreign investors in a position where they're not quite sure what the future value of their investment will be worth. And this could potentially sort of dissuade them from wanting to invest in the economy until they have a clearer picture exactly of where the exchange rate or the Egyptian pound is set to be or end up over the medium term.